and welcome to our information session tonight on the Ignition Fund. Glad to have everyone joining us virtually. Want to introduce my colleagues Justine and Mike, who are also joining us tonight from the Innovation PEI team. They're going to monitor the chat, so feel free to enter questions in the chat, and they'll bring those forward as we go along. We're also going to have sort of a Q&A time at the end as well. So whether you want to submit questions when you think of them or at the end of the session, we would be happy to field uh, any of your questions. So without further delay, I think we'll get right into it. We'll sort of go over what we're going to cover tonight, and that'll give you a bit of a feel. My name is David Gamble, and I'm a business development officer in Western PEI for Innovation PEI.
And I'm Mike Gillis. I'm a BDO, business development officer in the Charlottetown, Queens County area.
Great. All right.
And I'm Justine. I'm the marketing manager for innovation. I'm here too.
Fantastic. Okay. So this is basically what we're going to go over tonight. And trying to cover all the bases. We've had info sessions across PEI. So we've been doing this for over the last couple of weeks. And we're excited to share this information with you this evening. So we'll get right into it. What catches a lot of people's attention right out of the gate is that this is a $25,000 potential per recipient, and this fund is fairly unique compared to other Innovation PEI programs, at least within the business division, in that it's a competitive process. So our call for submissions that went out and started on April 7th. You're essentially competing with other island entrepreneurs for a pool of funding, and you're shot at $25,000. So it is a little different, and it means that we try to treat all our applicants equally and sort of lay out all the rules and conditions up front, and then we judge the submissions as they come in, which is a little different than our normal program intake for our day-to-day programs. So another thing that's unique about this Ignition Fund is with other Innovation PEI programming, there's always a matching dollar value, and that could be 85%, 60%, depending on the program. But for the Ignition Fund, there is technically no matching funds requirements. So your business idea could theoretically be 100% funded. The reality is, most startups cost more than 25,000. So quite often our winners also have to put in their own funds and sometimes seek out financing or investment from other individuals to make it happen. It's also our winners have shared with us that, winning the Ignition Fund has also helped them seek out other funds, whether it's venture capital, seed funding, or even in the financing world. It's sort of a feather in their hat if they're successful in winning the Ignition Fund. One of the unique things about this program as well is the fund's sort of deployment is pretty flexible. So clients, have used this fund in a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of flexibility in what the Ignition team who would work with you if you were chosen as a winner could help you, deploy those funds. So that could be in marketing, could be in equipment, could be in attaining staff or, legal fees for things like intellectual property. It could be R&D funds or testing. It's sort of I guess it's open to your imagination and how you could use these funds. There are, I guess, a few examples that you may not be able to use the funds for, but certainly we're receptive to hearing how you want to use them, and our team members will work with you to find, the most, I guess, advantageous way to deploy those funds. Of note, it's good to know that only expenses occurred after our application deadline date of May 11th would be eligible. So, let's say back in January you purchased a piece of equipment for your business. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be eligible if you were to win the ignition fund. It would only be a cost that you incur on or after that May 11th submission deadline. So just keep that in the back of your head. So, sort of our core eligibility criteria for ignition, to be sort of even considered, I guess, as eligible would be your business has to commit or already be established and operating a PEI. So you're not required to have a business registered when you submit your application. However, by the time it comes to disperse funds, if you're chosen as a winner, you will have to, have your business registered, have bank accounts set up and that kind of stuff before funds are distributed. Importantly, your product or service has to have a high degree of innovation or uniqueness. And, that's a bit of a subjective thing, but however, we are looking for, new cutting edge, things that can compete, ideally on a global scale or at a minimum, on a national scale. And that aren't established products or services already, that they are unique. And that is an important thing that we look at. Another thing we look at is that export potential, which I sort of alluded to. So not only does the idea have to have export potential, rather, you have to demonstrate in your submission that that there is a market opportunity that exists outside of Prince Edward Island and that you have a plan to seek that out. Now, maybe in your first year of operation, you're going to test market on PEI because that's where it makes the most sense for what you're doing. That's okay, but we do want to see that you do have a plan to take this further beyond our borders. And Innovation PEI's definition of export is anywhere outside of PEI, so that could be nationally or internationally. And then the final sort of core eligibility criteria for a program is that the product or service must be scalable. So, this is something that, this isn't for hobby businesses. The Ignition Fund isn't for sort of like the side hustle. This is for something that, can be scaled up and, ideally grow into, a self-sustaining business that's going to return an economic benefit to PEI. So those are the sort of the four things that we're looking for. If your idea doesn't hit all four of these, it's going to be really challenging for an applicant to move through, our evaluation process and make it through because we do get a number of high quality submissions. So it's important to give a lot of thought before you submit to those categories. So initial fund is two separate phases, and this is one of the things that makes it interesting as well. The first phase is sort of where we're at today. So we're sort of in this pre-written application or written submission phase, and essentially that's a 13-page maximum Microsoft Word or PDF document that you submit. So there is no actual application form that you fill out for the Ignition Fund. It's actually you preparing this document based on our applicant guideline, which we're going to go through a little later on in this presentation. And, to be able to make it further in the process will essentially come down to your ability to communicate your idea effectively in the categories identified. And, it's very similar. This written application is very similar to, developing a business plan. I guess the major difference would be we're not looking for, financial projections, cash flow statements, balance sheets, that kind of stuff at this stage, because a lot of businesses are coming in fairly early on in the equation. We do look for a sales forecast, but So you can sort of look at it as a business plan without those financial projections is essentially what we're looking for. And the information we ask for is the same information that lenders or other investors or other agencies you might be approaching with your idea, would be looking for similar types of information. So from our written submissions, those are scored by an internal team at Innovation PEI, and it's a pretty large effort. We have three individuals that evaluate each submission, and each submission that meets the core eligibility criteria, and then they're scored, and essentially those top scored submissions make it to our phase two. And phase two is an in-person pitch presentation. So I guess how I like to word it is a very friendly version of Dragon's Den. And we have a judging panel who are actually completely separate from the individuals that review that written submission. And they're there. They're experts and experienced people from a variety of industries and fields, academia, research, IT, bioscience. Our volunteers change each round, and we also have participation from Innovation PEI itself that sits on that panel, and they evaluate your 15-minute pitch, and then they also have a 10-minute Q&A. So that's your opportunity if you make it to that final round to wow our judges and have a shot at that $25,000. So keep in mind that if you make it to phase two, it's almost like phase one is done. So that written submission, our pitch panel doesn't even see that 13-page written submission. They'll see a 2-page summary that you would prepare if you're chosen as a finalist, and they're essentially judging your business on that actual time in the room when they're with you. So, you work hard at phase one with the goal of making it to our final round where you get a chance to pitch in person. Yeah. So this is our timeline, and we're well into it. So we launched on the 7th. Our application submission deadline is May 11th at 1 p.m. Atlantic. And I'd ask you to make a note of that. Every year we have late submissions, or almost every year. And certainly we're not able to accept submissions that come in after 1 p.m. Atlantic. So to make it fair for everyone else that did meet the deadline, that's when it's closed. So we do have an auto responder on our email address associated with this program, and you'll get a response that'll serve as your confirmation that we do have your submission. If you don't receive that, you should reach out to us, and then we can look into that and make sure indeed, maybe it ended up in a spam folder or got filtered out by, our IT department for trying to prevent cybersecurity type of thing. So it's important if you don't receive that notice to reach out to us. But I really encourage you to not wait until 1 o'clock or 12:59, or even maybe the morning of May 11th. Set an artificial deadline as a best practice, maybe the Friday before, and that allows you extra time if there's some, unusual or unlikely things that happen that can happen, like internet going down, satellites going down, a freak snowstorm, which on PEI isn't that unusual, even in May. You name it, it can happen. So, it's probably best to get that in by the Friday before and work towards that date, and then you're good. And then starting on the afternoon of May 11th, we peel into all our submissions and we start the evaluation process. So we plan to notify our finalists by the 29th, and we'll also be notifying applicants who weren't successful, who didn't move on to the finals as well. So you can sort of circle that date in your calendar. And then a couple other dates you might want to put in your calendar. Be optimistic that you're going to make the that pitch round. Associated with this program, we do have a pitch workshop that happens on June 8th, and we have a pitch coach. Uh, Laura Johnson is going to join us. She's joined us a number of times previously. She does a great job of helping prepare applicants to actually do that in-person pitch. She sort of workshops it, so it is a very hands-on workshop. You'll get to do a bit of pitching right in the room that day, and it's about I'd say a three-quarter day session that is scheduled to take place on June 8th. And then also as a part of that pitch workshop, our finalists do get to attend a private one-on-one with Laura for some private coaching. And that can usually happens by Zoom or some online platform. But I'm sure, if you're able to meet, she could probably meet you in person as well. And that's scheduled sort of usually on the day of the 8th, then Laura schedules those sessions with everyone. Then the pitches themselves are scheduled to take place on June 23rd and 24th, and they're happening at the Atlantic Technology Center in Charlottetown. And those are sort of our in-stone dates because we do rely on our volunteer pitch judges who commit to those dates. So you do have to be available to pitch on one of those 2 days. If the day and time you're assigned doesn't work for you, if you reach out to us soon after we contact you, we'll do our best to slot you in on another day or another time, uh, somewhere on that 23rd, 24th timeline. So if for some strange reason you're just totally not able to make it, you're out of the country or something like that, we could accommodate if we had lots of prior notice, a virtual presentation, but it would have to be a live virtual presentation, as we don't want anyone to have an advantage to do like a pre-recorded thing. So, yeah. And then usually results would be released mid to late July. At the very least, our winners will be notified by then. A formal press release may not happen that soon, but usually mid to late July, winners will be notified. And if you weren't successful, we'll also let you know. Just to give you a bit of a feel for, how many submissions we usually get, because we often get that as a question, and I just took a sort of a random sample of some of our recent rounds. And you can see we had a low of what, 25, a high of 45. Um, Last fall we had 36, and I would say out of the 36, we probably had 29, 30-ish that were submissions that fully met the criteria. We had out of that 36 a few late submissions that unfortunately we weren't able to evaluate. And certainly those applicants would be able to submit, this round if they missed the last round. And then we ended up funding four winners, so four $25,000 winners last round. But typically we end up awarding five. And, essentially that comes down to, how many good quality submissions and do our judges feel the criteria, has been met to be successfully awarded those funds. Yeah, so that's sort of the atypical number of winners we have and the number of applicants. Now, if you're not successful winning Ignition, there may be other innovation PEI programs that can help you along the way. So we do offer to pair you up with a member of one of our business development officers who can work with you to see if there's any other programming fits that can help you along the path of launching your business. So I'm just going to identify a couple of recent Ignition winners, just sort of to give you sort of a view of some of the recent ones and sort of the diversity that we have. Agronom AI was one of our recent winners, and they're essentially an agricultural drone analytics company, and they're using drones in a pretty unique way to do top seeding, to do fertilizing and analyzing crops. In the future, they hope to do potentially spray applications down the road, and they're helping farmers take all the data that they've collected, and improve their farming practices, increase crop yields, that kind of stuff. So that was pretty interesting and exciting, and you may have heard of that in the news. They've been in the news a couple of times over the last few months. So you could look them up online if you're curious. Another recent winner we've had is Skyline Genetics, and this is a really interesting one, sort of from the field of bioscience. Skyline is developing a proprietary program for in vitro fertilization, which essentially, the goal is to increase the fertilization rate, which, could be a real game changer for our dairy farmers when they're managing their herds. It's very expensive, very time consuming process, and this is a pretty interesting uh, offering that's being developed. They're also developing a lab to do IVF protocols. Currently, that is only done in Quebec, or the closest lab to us is done in Quebec, and embryos have to be transferred, which also means you end up, losing some due to the amount of time it takes and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, this is a pretty interesting one. And another one you may have heard about, this company's been around for a few years now. Another ignition winner is Tractile. And Tractile was actually recently featured in the Stingray Radio podcast of Island. I believe it was 10 Island entrepreneurs they interviewed. And Jordan Rose, one of the founders of Tractile, was one of their first interviews, I believe. And Tractile works with primarily food manufacturing businesses to optimize their inventory and make it better decisions using AI. So it helps with data collection and providing insights in real time that help management and food service make good decisions, make their businesses more successful. So that's a business you may have heard about. They've been successful securing a seed round of funding from BDC, and yeah, they're look them up online. There's a bit of media about this company, and another great PEI success story. So, how do we review the submissions that come in, and what do we look at? So I sort of touched on this a little bit when I talked about our core criteria, but we certainly look at how innovative this product or service offering is, and we understand, innovation is a word that's thrown around a lot, but we really are looking for new innovations. So, what meaningful difference does your product or service, that you've created or that you are creating, what does it have that matters to the market, that brings extra value over what already exists? That's a pretty important question to answer. If you don't have that question answered, that's really the core of what we're looking for here. So that's something you do have to give some pretty considerable thought to. Another thing that has a pretty heavy weighting in our evaluation process is the experience of founders and the management team. So that could be, work experience, educational experience, maybe previous business startup or business ownership experience. Could be, volunteer work you've done that's relevant. Could be, either co-founders or paid advisors, professionals like accountants, marketing people, or it could be unpaid mentors. So maybe you're setting up an advisory board of unpaid mentors that are going to help you work through the process. And they're experienced individuals and they've agreed to be a part of your team. That would be something you'd probably want to tell us about, because we see that you do have some of the right supports that raise the probability of you being successful. So that's a pretty important aspect of what we look at and evaluate. We also look at the market opportunity and the export potential. So, that is where, the onus goes on you, the applicant, to demonstrate that. Don't rely on the reviewer and their experience and their knowledge of an industry. to make that call. Make it easy for them. Show them, what's convinced you this is a good opportunity. Do you have any market validation already? Do you have people that have expressed an interest in what you're producing, or do you have a minimum viable product developed, or, where are you at in that equation, and what's the plan there? And then fourthly, we look at that business growth piece, and can this business scale up and grow and provide that economic benefit to PEI, potentially jobs for the province and other, spending, tax, tax income for the province, that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into the actual sections of the applicant guide. So if you go to our website, off to the right-hand side, you can download our applicant guide, which is in a PDF. And I really encourage you to follow that applicant guide and insert your information following that format. You're not forced to. We'll still evaluate regardless of how you present your information. However, you want to make it as easy as possible for those evaluating your submission to give you, top marks type of thing. So the easiest way to do that is to follow sort of the format laid out in the guide. So we're going to sort of walk through this. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm just going to walk through sort of what we're looking for in the guide, what it covers, and then you can go back and download that applicant guide yourself, and sort of work through it as you prepare your submission. So overall, at first, we're just looking for your general contact information. We've already got a couple of submissions that haven't given us a name, a phone number. That's important. So, give us your basic contact information. What's the business name or proposed business name? Who are you? What's your name? How do we reach you? If we can't reach you, it's pretty hard to tell you that you're winning something. So that's pretty important. And then we jump into section 2, is the sort of the general project information and the overview of what you're doing. So this is almost like the elevator pitch. You're trying to get our attention here and explain to us what it is you want to offer. So, we allow for up to 3 pages for this section. So, we want you to be concise, but we want you to give us enough information so we clearly understand what it is you're developing. And I would say this is sort of your first, just like you're going to have to do if you're talking to potential customers, or talking to your market, you need to be able to communicate what it is you're doing. And this is an important place where you need to do that as well. So we ask you to explain what product or service problem you're attempting to solve. And that can be a hard one sometimes for people, but it's an important thing to think about. If you're not really fixing anything, then why would someone want to purchase this, right? So are you taking away a pain point? Are you increasing profitability? Are you making a customer's life more convenient? Are you saving them time, saving them money? What is it that you're doing for your market? How is it innovative? So we've sort of already stressed how that's important. We don't want to have to guess at this. We want you to overtly communicate to us, how is your product or service innovative? How does it separate it from the competition that already exists? And we ask you to be realistic about that, because there's always competition. There's very few things that we would ever see that doesn't have any competition. And if it doesn't have any competition, could be a great opportunity. However, it also could be challenging to get a market to accept it if it's something that's totally sort of that new thing. So, explain that to us. Is it sustainable? Or is it something that can easily be copied or ripped off by another business, another entrepreneur? And that's where we look at things like intellectual property. I would encourage you that even if your business idea doesn't have intellectual property such as copyrights, trademarks, industrial designs connected to it, potentially, that you at least research that avenue to see if there's any potential. And then you should communicate in your submission that you've looked into it. You may be pursuing certain aspects of it, or you may not, but that you have sort of researched that because that is something we actually look at and score. So we're looking at that sustainability piece, and obviously, if there's some intellectual property attached to it, or potentially attached to it, that could help make it more sustainable and harder to copy or emulate. Section B is getting into that founders and team. So we allow for 2 pages for that. What are your skill sets, your experience, your expertise? What have you done in the past that makes you, well suited to be the one that drives this forward? This is important to think about. You know, Even in the written submission, certainly it carries quite a bit of weight, but I can tell you from experience being in the room with our judges, they really look at that experience and team around the entrepreneur. Do they have the support they need to make it happen? And if you're a one person founder, then sometimes you have to, dig deep to say, if I don't have some of the skills, because most people aren't good at everything, you might be a software developer and have great skills in that area, but maybe you don't have any experience marketing. So we ask you to give some thought to, how are you going to handle that aspect? Who are you going to bring in? Are you going to hire for that? Are you going to have an employee, hire a consultant, or, tap into mentors, advisors? What's the plan there? You can attach a CV or a resume to the back that doesn't count as your 2 pages if you choose to. But as far as the scoring goes, the scoring is done strictly on the each section. So on that 2 page section in this case. Then we get back to the market section, or we get to the market section, and you can see that it has a 4 page max limit. So that probably tells you this is in a pretty important section. And I think generally, when we look at these submissions, sometimes this is where the difference is in the market. How much research have they done? Do they have any validation from the market that this is something that the market wants, that they're looking for, that they'd be willing to purchase? Have they looked at the competition? Have they been able to carve out where they would fit in around that competition and what their advantages are? We also ask you to describe how you plan to market and promote your product once you get it ready. So what's the strategy for bringing that to market? And depending on where you're at in the process, sometimes that can be challenging, but we do want you to give some thought to that because we need to evaluate, does your vision for how to get this to market actually make sense with what's established in the industry you're in? Then we're also asking you to tell us about your revenue model. So, the Ignition Fund is for for-profit businesses, and at the end of the day, we want to see how you're going to generate revenue. So, is it a per by the hour? Is it a per unit? Is it software as a service, as a SaaS? Are there royalties involved? Are you licensing what you're doing to another company? How are you going to generate revenue for what it is you're doing? And every business has a different sort of model for that. So it's up to you as an entrepreneur to decide what the right approach is. So the next section is sort of the bones of your submission, the statement of work. And what we're looking for here is, you know, basically a timeline and milestones of what work you need to do over the next 12 to 18 months to bring your business to life. So, we see businesses at various stages when they come to us for ignition. Generally, they have to be pre-revenue businesses or very early revenue. If they already have $2 million in sales, then they're not really pre-revenue. So, they would have to be businesses that are just launching or even earlier, more at the idea stage. But we want to see what your milestones and timeline to develop your product or service and to bring it to the market. And we want to also see a budget of how you plan to use the ignition funds. So, this may evolve as time goes along, but, at time of submission, how would you foresee using ignition funds? Are you buying tools, equipment? Are you hiring staff or third-party consultants or advisors? Do you plan to spend the money on a marketing campaign? Do you have to pay for maybe R&D testing or apply for patents or copyrights, trademarks, that kind of thing. Yeah, and if you need more than 25,000 to start this business, where do you intend to source those other funds? So tell us that. Is there personal investment involved? Do you plan on getting a loan, or have you tapped into another government entity that you're looking at to source those funds that you do need to get it off the ground? And provide any details around that additional investment if you need it. So how are you using the funds to carry out your plan? And then we are asking for a 3-year sales forecast. And depending on what your business is or the product or service is involved, can really change, when sales will actually happen. You may be coming into this with a product that's ready to launch. Sort of all you need maybe is the marketing dollars to launch a marketing campaign. Well, you may have revenue right away. That's fine. Maybe you're at the very early stages of developing a bioscience creation in your very early days. That you could be year 2 or year 3 before you potentially see revenue from that. So we're asking you to give that some thought and say what's a reasonable timeline for what, based on your statement of work, for when you will actually see revenue, and then what would that revenue be in those next couple of years. Um, and then the last one that's under this statement of work piece is an explanation of the economic benefit to PEI. So what we mean by that is, Innovation PEI is a crown corporation of the province of PEI. So every project that we're involved with, there has to be an economic benefit to the province. So if that's your job as part of your submission to identify what other benefits besides you receiving this money would this business create if it were to get funded. So maybe you plan on hiring staff, maybe you have third-party vendors, professionals that you're going to hire on PEI for things like accounting, marketing, um, that kind of thing. Maybe you're going to deal with Prince Edward Island manufacturers to source materials, equipment, or maybe make a product for you, something that you designed or developed. If maybe you have a software application and you're going to hire PEI developers, uh, you know, what do you see as that economic benefit to the province? Um, is it tax revenues? Um, you know, what does that look like? So once you get all that together, we ask you, as I mentioned earlier, combine it all into a PDF or Word document. And as I mentioned as well, get it into us by the May 11th at 1 p.m. Atlantic on a Monday. And you send your submission to that ignition fund at gov.pe.ca address. So that address is also in the applicant guide that's available on our website. And yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, when you submit, you should receive an auto response. And if you don't, be sure to reach out to myself or a team member at Innovation PEI and we'll look into it. So we're going to go, I guess, to the Q&A section. Do we have any questions, Mike or Justine?
I think there's a question coming in the chat now, but just to reiterate what you're saying, you did a great job, of course, as always, David, to outline the program, but really follow that guideline that David mentioned earlier. On the Ignition page, if you go to the right, there's a link to download that PDF I've heard some of the successful applicants that they actually copy and pasted that into a Word document and typed under the various headings and sections and then cleaned it up later, of course. But that way they're trying very diligently to try and make sure that they're answering the questions and meeting the criteria of the program. And I had a lot of questions at some of my sessions, David, you probably did too, about the length of it. And you do have a 13-page limit there in the actual application. And to be straightforward, that is the 13 pages that are going to be evaluated. However, if you want to include appendices, and lots of people do, I know personally as an evaluator, and I've been doing this for 6 years, I read the appendices, I look at them. So yes, if you have a lot of extra technical stuff you want to include in your application, that's a great place to put it. But that doesn't mean that you undersell it in those first 13 pages, because that's primarily what is being scored in that initial phase that you were talking about, David. Anyways, I'm going to stop there and we'll see if there's some questions. So asked and answered, Justine. Thank you. You put the link in for the guideline. Everyone, if you just click that, that'll take you directly to the Ignition page. Well, actually, the link off the Ignition page with that downloadable PDF of the application guide. So much encouraged to take a look at that.
I just want to mention too that folks are welcome to come on camera and turn their mics on if speaking your question is a little bit easier to you as well.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thanks for all the information. Just curious about the Word document. When you mentioned the page limit, is that like single-spaced Word document, 12 font kind of thing, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we don't have a sort of a technical requirement, but I would say, you know, if you shrunk it down to six, you're
Sure.
probably not making it easier for us to evaluate that. So, you know, we want them to be concise. 13 pages may sound like a lot, it may not sound like much, but I think in 13 pages you can effectively communicate what it is you're doing. If you can't, you may have a challenge to communicate to a market.
Yeah, I just didn't want to inadvertently go over. So no, that's helpful.
Yeah. And you know, what we get into, you know, if you're a line over, that's not going to be the end of the world. But what we get into is, you know, sometimes people submit something that's 35 pages long, right? So it's really a time management thing more than anything at the end of the day. You know, we have to be able to be, and then you really wonder with all those extra pages, what couldn't have been said in that
Right.
13-page window.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're making it easy for us tonight, folks. Certainly,
David,
yeah.
one of my sessions that I did, you weren't with me, someone asked, do you mind if we put hyperlinks into the document to say the LinkedIn profile of one of the mentors, for example, thereby, you know, making it easy for the scoring people to access who their support team is, and not necessarily adding a lot to the word count. I said that was fine, but you know, don't forget to clearly say in that proper application portion who your team is and what their function is too. Um, as I said, I like to read everything and look at everything, and I'm by nature curious, so I do. But you know, maybe not every evaluator is going to read, you know, 25 pages of appendices either, right? So
Yeah, and that's a great point, Mike. Like at the end of the day, they're evaluating on the 13 pages. So absolutely include links if you want to. And I think you'll find most evaluators would check those out, but don't rely on the link as the sole source of information. Essentially what you said, Mike. Yeah.
okay. Any other questions out there?
It looks like there's one coming in on the chat for you folks.
Thanks.
I'll remind everyone as well, just while we're waiting for that to come in, uh, feel free. I think on the screen there, I have myself, my contact information, and Mike's contact information showing there. So if you think of something, down the road in the next few days and you want to reach out to us, let us know. We'll do our best to get back to you as quick as we can. If you send us something on Sunday night before the deadline, you might not get an answer in time, so you probably should get that one in a few days before the deadline. But yeah, don't feel you have to ask it tonight. So we're happy to talk.
Again, David, we don't mind helping people and guiding people. We can't actually read your applications or portions of it prior to and give direct feedback on your submissions, but we're great for general comments and questions, and we'll do everything we can to help you out. And again, contact us, a little bit before the deadline so we have some time to respond. I think we have a question coming in here now, Justine. Can you give us some examples of winners in the past that provided a service specifically with no product that was considered highly exportable? I don't know, Dave. Do you have any examples of a non-export winner?
Of a non-export winner?
Yeah.
A non-export winner.
A non-product winner.
Oh, a non-product winner. Well, I mean,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I misread it. Sorry. Go ahead.
I guess in the true sense, service software as a service, I mean, in that side of it, I'm trying to, that's a really good question. If we've had an out and out, I would say the closest to that would be probably the Skyline Genetics that I identified, because half their sort of business is delivering IVF services. And then they're also developing a process, which would be something that would have, uh, IP attached to it. So, that's sort of a combination. That would be that example. But definitely many more products than services. Services are harder generally to scale, and they're also can be harder to make them, you know, unique and not there's often not IP attached to them, so they're less likely. But yeah, I'd have to think about that a little bit. I'd have to look through my list and see the past winners. Can
I
you
think
think
I
of any,
actually have
Justine?
one off the top of my head. Key Course was an online platform for folks learning to speak English, and it was specifically tailored to the English language requirements for, I believe, the permanent residency exam or different exams where you basically prove that you can speak English, but very tailored to folks that English is not their first language. So I believe that their service was exportable nationally because it had a very specific Canadian lens. But that might be an example of that, because it's more of a providing the learning experience rather than the actual product.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And we also had, now I'm thinking of it, thanks for sharing that one. I used to have that one in the slideshow, actually. Another one I can think of, and this is where the program has evolved. So sort of pre-COVID or just around early COVID times, I'm not sure of the year, but we had a business. I'm drawing a blank on the business name. You guys might bail me out on this one, but it basically doing online fitness classes, online training, and that's pretty broadly adopted now. That's pretty common, but back then that they sort of had perfect timing, and it was very scalable. Started as one person, I believe, if I'm correct. They have 2 or 3 employees now, and a large following. So, that was pretty innovative when they did it, when they started it. It's not as innovative now. There's all kinds of online training, personal training, and physical fitness businesses, but that would be another example. So, yeah, just can't think of the name of the business.
I can't think of it either, David, and I don't have an example necessarily of Ignition Fund, but I know when I'm talking to some of my clients that are service providers or consultancy services, We have some thresholds in that, generally speaking, when we're talking about marketing support or something along those lines. And I often ask the question, do you have to stand in front of people to do your job or to make money? Or are you able to offer the service digitally or on a platform? And therefore, it's more scalable and it's not dependent on you being either literally in front of the client or being, in a Zoom call in live time. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but a lot of my clients now have been able to digitize what they do and sell it as a subscription service, or it's an accelerated line of marketing to get them to a certain point as well. So we like to be as flexible as we can, I think, David, and we listen and hear people out and do what we can to help them meet the
Absolutely.
criteria. Yeah.
Oh.
Was there another question I missed? No?
Yes, there is one at the end. Can you give me a estimation of how many Ignition grants have been credited or awarded to the arts and entertainment sector?
Mm.
Great
I
question.
cannot specifically. I can't. I really can't. I'd have to go through the list and then I guess, what you classify that as. I would say probably not many because Innovation PEI sort of has arts and an arts and culture division that sort of has its own sort of suite of programming.
And
But
yeah,
certainly, what's that?
and not just programming, but actual little competitions and grants and
Yeah.
to help their products. So you're right.
But it's certainly if that is something that is scalable, exportable, meets the core criteria, there's no sector that we would rule out for Ignition by any means. So if your idea meets, that criteria, it would absolutely, have fair game to compete on those merits. Um, Historically, we probably had a greater number of IT related offerings and some bioscience offerings, but we've seen hard good manufactured products. We've seen some occasional services. It really is a broad spectrum of winners that we've seen. And what was innovative in 2017, if you were to comb through some archives and see who won, they probably wouldn't win today because it's not as innovative, this many years later. So it's more common. It's something, that the market may have developed and evolved over that time. So yeah. But yeah, I personally would love to see a submission from that arts and culture side that met that criteria. That would be fantastic.
Okay, we have another one here. Dexter has a comment. I can't find him now. The app I'm working on isn't quite ready for trial, so I'm glad there's a fall startup fund. Okay, hoping it is by then, but can I still go through with my idea if it's still in development by then, or does it need to be 100% market ready? And can I take that, David?
Sure.
Yeah, you don't have to have it 100% ready for market. I remember a personal client, and I worked with him for a long time, and he did 3 different runs through Ignition Fund and was successful in the end. And it was pretty early days. One thing that it did do, though, that first application to Ignition Fund, and then I was assigned to work with him afterwards, was we were able to kind of walk through what he was going to do. And we talked about some of the other programs that were available in our little suite of products, especially for early starting companies. And we were able to refer on to some other services in the community and the business community that helped them get along, including things like Propel ICT, which is a great incubator, Atlantic incubator. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, no, it doesn't have to be 100% ready to go to market or trial. If you have a well-formulated idea, plan, proposal, there's nothing wrong with submitting it. And there's nothing wrong with not being pushed forward to the pitch session. You can still be assigned to a BDO and talk about what you want to do and refine the product and iterate a little more to the point where it's even more competitive in the next round. And there's never it's never a bad thing not to win in one round. You can go on and win the next one, right?
Yeah, and we have had, and if you're totally not ready, sure you can wait. But if you're close to being ready to submit, certainly we've had more than one winner that has submitted multiple times. We've had people that have made the finalists multiple times and ended up winning. So, it doesn't mean just because if you don't win your first kick at the can doesn't mean you're never going to make it, especially if you use that opportunity to get some feedback, work with a member of our team so that you can maybe better position what you're doing to give you the best shot possible. So, we can't fix it so you're going to win, but we can certainly, if you take that feedback that comes from the process, it's good. It'll help you in many ways, whether it's for Ignition or for, access to other funding opportunities down the line. Is that another question? I think we lost your mic, Mike.
Sorry about that. Does the Ignition Fund consider software solutions that help companies solve problems, save time, improve transparency as eligible for funding? Quick answer is yes. Yeah, that you're solving a problem. And if you're solving a problem and you're innovative or unique or both, you should probably be applying.
Could I ask a quick question while we're here? This is maybe for much further down the line, but I'm just wondering, in terms of the criteria for winning the Ignition Fund, is it per person or founder in the company, or is it just based on the company itself? So say in 5-6 years down the line, there's another business that we need to build and are working on, and that would need maybe the Ignition Fund more than the current one we're working on at the moment. Would winning the Ignition Fund for this business block us out of winning for another business if the business is completely separate and just the founding group or some of the founders are the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, absolutely, you could apply again as long as it's for either a new product or a new business altogether. So, as long as it isn't like just the same thing in another version, you know what I mean? Like if it's a true different product or new or true new business, then you could have similar founders or the same founder involved. Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much.
Sorry, I was typing, but it might be easier if I ask this question vocally. So I'm looking at a business that has a higher local need to fill a gap with basically like a professional niche experience that typically isn't found on the island. And this might like be more prominent than the actual innovativeness of the service or the product that I'm submitting. It's more like baseline in the idea that there's a need and a growing need on the island for somebody to open a business with this kind of skill set or this kind of product or this kind of service to service a growing industry here. But it's not necessarily innovative. Like there's organizations and businesses that exist in this sector. They just don't necessarily exist here. Would this still be classified as an application, or is the innovation lacking in this respect?
You know, innovation is subjective, but I mean, if you're sort of self-disclosing that it isn't necessarily innovative, I would say, certainly you could still submit, but the probability of advancing, into the finals, let's say, would be pretty low. Um, you know, we may have other programming that can help you on the path, and that's if that's the scenario, and I would even encourage you if you're on the fence, reach out to us and tell us what it is. Privately we can talk to you and maybe give you the back. I mean, I'd never tell you not to submit because that's your choice. Whether you like, we'll entertain all submissions, absolutely. But if it doesn't meet sort of those benchmarks, then the probability of it moving through our process and being successful would be low. So if you don't have an export lens. Now, our other innovation programs, we do have a bit of a window to import substitution. So if truly this service, or if it is a service, this business was going to operate in PEI and there really was no local offering, we would look at that, but we'd look at it more likely under other innovation programs than Ignition, because that export piece is a core part of that Ignition criteria.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like there's still potential for export,
Hmm.
especially with like connections of the founders and things like this. They would probably leverage. Like
Right.
the interesting aspect is that it's in the entertainment sector, and the like government film funds and things like this allow for a very small entryway into accessing um, like incentive return. And like I work in the film industry, and I've lived in Ontario most of my life, but I moved out here 5 years ago. And the entry into Ontario incentives in the film industry and animation and things like this is like 100 to $150,000, whereas on PEI it's 25,000. So it's a much different like barrier to entry here that allows for a lot more smaller projects or smaller divisions of the projects to be able to be done here. And also the film industry is growing with, like, you've seen a bunch of the government releases and things like that out of the success. So I'm just curious if that sector or that area would be worth the idea of innovation, in a sense that there's definitely a need for it on the island, and it's also exportable to like the United States and other provinces across Canada, due to the fact that we have a lower barrier to entry into our incentive funds. So it's not
Yeah,
necessarily an innovative idea. It's the fact that there's allocations here that make it much more appealing, let's say, to partners to work with us.
right. And I think I don't know if I can answer that exactly, but I think maybe, I would leave it at, I guess, your ability to communicate, what you're doing, knowing what we're looking for and evaluating, because it isn't so much are we judging your business and do we want it here for the Ignition Fund, it's you're competing against other entrepreneurs. Like we could have
Of course.
35 excellent businesses, but unfortunately we don't have, under the Ignition Fund, we can't support them all, right? So essentially, it's the ones that sort of fit into our criteria the best and can communicate it effectively are the ones that win. So it's, certainly we would connect you with our culture team, and whether you were successful or not with Ignition, you would have that opportunity to have those conversations and to look at our other programming. Like our clients aren't generally classified into, like, most of our programming isn't classified into it's for this industry or that industry. It's generally for business, right? And unless it's art specific. You know what I mean? Like if we have a culture division and an art division and they have a process for art and culture business, then obviously that's the business that fits there, right? So yeah. So I don't know if I answered it exactly, but that's probably as good as I can give you.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Some great questions. Well, if that's it for questions, I'll probably call it. Um, we enjoyed being here and we enjoyed everyone's time. For everybody that hung around to the end here, we really appreciate you doing that. And thank you again to Mike and Justine for helping and making this a good session, I think. So thank you so much. And we hope to see lots of great submissions from some of these names that I've seen on the screen here tonight.